A biting December chill raced across the makeshift airstrip outside Reims, France, slicing through the frayed wool of German uniforms that had previously advanced with bold assurance, but now draped loosely over gaunt frames. The conflict had driven these soldiers beyond the grip of starvation and fatigue, plunging them into a realm more subdued, more burdensome. Capitulation. A lengthy queue of captives, some hobbling, others devoid of limbs altogether, swathed in coarse wrappings already marred by the grime of their trek, stood beneath the vigilant gaze of American sentries. The sentries refrained from crowing, from intimidation, from idle chatter even. They merely guided the figures toward the idling cargo aircraft, as though herding wayfarers instead of the shattered vestiges of a hostile force. It was the hush, above all else, that disturbed the detainees most profoundly. They had braced for fury. What greeted them was protocol. In that procession stood a youth who had once clung tenaciously to the dream of triumph. 19-year-old Hinrich Miller, whose limb had been severed by jagged fragments near the Ardennes, propped himself on a makeshift staff hewn from a sapling by a fellow countryman using a folding blade. The prop was irregular, jagged, and every advance jarred a spike of agony up his flank. He had held back tears when the amputation occurred. He had stifled sobs upon hearing his regiment had been engulfed. Yet here, amid the vast expanse of the landing field, a sensation crept in that he had long suppressed. Doubt so profound, it snagged in his chest like a hook. Trailing him was an elder figure, formerly a vehicle repairman, who cradled a modest tin emblem in his palms, caressing it without purpose. He had earned it for mending motors amid barrages. It held no significance anymore. The Yanks had seized armaments, but spared decorations. They grasped a subtler essence of honor, one less bombastic than his own. He pondered if this rendered it more dignified or more insidious. The U.S. freighter idled on the tarmac, its propellers growling like far-off tempests. Whispers had circulated that certain detainees were destined for transoceanic relocation to enclosures in America. The notion struck as preposterous, to be hauled across vast seas they'd never beheld by the very foes depicted as tormentors. Domestic broadcasts had painted Yanks as effete savages. Being conveyed intact, tended to injuries, and nourished with hot rations, clashed with those tales. And bewilderment amid combat was a perilous brew. Yet America grappled with its own quandary. Continental killing grounds brimmed with detainees. Urban centers in England and Gaul bore craters from ordnance and scraped by on meager provisions. The states boasted acreage, provisions, and, crucially, agricultural plots and assembly lines craving manpower. Manpower the Hague Accords allowed, provided it remained compassionate. Thus, the maimed were prioritized, those least prone to unrest, those the fatherland might discreetly disown. Hinrich's support skidded on the iced terrain, prompting a U.S. watcher to advance on reflex, limb extended to brace him. The motion was modest, fleeting, yet Hinrich gaped as though the fellow had uttered his moniker. The watcher merely inclined his head, repositioned Hinrich's grip, and resumed his station. No utterances, no admonitions, merely a stabilizing clasp. Hinrich grappled with benevolence from an adversary. As the detainees were at last conducted aboard the aircraft, they advanced with deliberate caution. The hold reeked of lubricant and tarpaulin. A few claimed benches. Others reclined upon litters fastened to bulkheads. A corpsman verified the security of dressings. One fellow, bereft of both lower extremities, gazed vacantly overhead. His mandible locked to suppress yelps as the fuselage quivered. As the craft ascended, a fleeting buoyancy enveloped the group. Forms rose from the soil. Hinrich clutched his purchase edge till his digits blanched. He peered via a narrow viewport. The terrain beneath, erstwhile hub of their devotion and allegiance, dwindled to insignificance, morphing into a mosaic of meadows and frost-bitten scrub. He speculated if he'd ever behold the Reich anew, and should he, if it would echo the homeland of his youth. The transatlantic voyage stretched interminably. The injured received soup and loaves. The cuts underwent daily scrutiny. No thrashings, no privation. The Yanks evidently prized regimen, method, habit. Dawn heralded the identical gentle-voiced healer, probing lesions, refreshing wraps, dispensing analgesics. Hinrich observed particulate specks drift in the fetid confines of the hold, straining to comprehend the unfolding. No doctrine had equipped him for a rival who regarded him as mortal. Upon final touchdown, the atmosphere grew balmier. They had alighted in Dixie, discernible by the tang of resin and the cloying moistness. The group squinted in the glare. Assurances had promised conveyance to a proper infirmary, replete with physicians, crisp bedding, and substantial sustenance. Hinrich harbored skepticism until the sight confirmed it. The facility lacked opulence, yet exuded method. Expansive panes, unadorned masonry, recent lacquer. The harmed were segregated from the hail and escorted to a chamber where attendants glided with mechanical precision. Among the inmates were U.S. troops, figures sans appendages, sans vision, marred by cicatrices narrating private sagas. The overseers harbored no dread in quartering Teutons alongside doughboys. They anticipated no clashes. Anguish acknowledges anguish, seldom clashing with its mirror. Hinrich's cut gleamed immaculate. The linen bore a subtle sudsy fragrance. An attendant appraised his residue with clinical dispatch. She evinced no compassion. She proffered no contrived grin. She merely toiled, murmuring to her colleague regarding sepsis peril and tissue viability. It marked the inaugural instance post-trauma wherein he was deemed not warrior but invalid. The veteran artisan perched upon his pallet adjacent, fixated skyward. Peculiar. He breathed in the Vaterland tongue, scarcely perceptible. I'd figured they'd despise us. Hinrich offered no retort. Words eluded him. Animus was straightforward. Endurance was labyrinthine. Weeks elapsed. The cadre mended gradually. Lesions knit. Temperatures normalized. They assimilated the chamber's cadence, repassed intervals, audits, lulls when illumination faded and existence seemed remote. And as physics knit, a void burgeoned therein. The strife persisted over the pond. Metropolises blazed, kin perished. They nestled secure. Yet security evoked timidity, desertion, idling. Then, one dawn as frost yielded to a frail thaw, a sawbone strode in bearing a schematic furled beneath his limb. The captives eyed him warily, anticipating mandates, edicts, some keen and absolute. Contrariwise, he spread the diagram upon a surface and unfurled it leisurely, disclosing an intricate sketch of a lower extremity, ferrous pivots, sculpted sole, flexible patella. This, he declared via intermediary, pertains to you. A protracted hush enveloped the space. The detainees gawked at the illustration, grasping its import dimly. The sawbones prodded the sheet softly. You'll ambulate once more. The utterance plunged like a pebble into a pond, diminutive, unadorned, yet sending undulations to every recess of every soul present. Hinrich's gullet constricted, not from sorrow, not from thanks, but from a profounder, riskier essence, optimism. And optimism, post all, proved the most harrowing element. Yet none fathomed that this boon would reclaim locomotion solely, but recast perceptions of foe, clemency, and self. Gentle amber rays pierced lofty casements in the sanatorium chamber, projecting luminous squares over tiers of ferrous framed pallets. The tang of disinfectant blended with a subtle brew of percolated joe wafting from an adjacent passage. For these inaugural Teutonic detainees conveyed hither, the luminosity seemed alien. Warfare had entailed mire, haze, and hasty aid stations. Infirmaries had been thronged locales where injuries suppurated soundlessly. Here prevailed expanse, hygiene, and quietude. Not the quietude of despondency, but the poise of structure. Hinrich reclined with digits interlaced upon his torso, contemplating the plaster above. The terminus where his member had been excised was knitted, liberated from the pyrexia that had erstwhile imperiled him. An attendant traversed the chamber bearing a ledger, appraising each case. Upon attaining him, she dipped her head, renewed the poultice, and proceeded. No sympathy, no scorn, merely labor. It constituted a form of cordiality, albeit unsentimental, and that very trait disquieted him. Karl, the seasoned artisan, arose each morn and burnished the tin token he retained. It no longer epitomized conquest, merely reminiscence. One midday, a US aide halted by him and queried in labored Deutsch if the bauble denoted valor. Labor, Karl responded. The aide inclined and departed. Karl tracked him, ambivalent if comprehended or overlooked, yet equally ambivalent why it signified. Beyond, an enclosed green sward unfurled under lofty conifers. The barrier bore razor coils aloft, yet the portal yawned ajar by daylight. Sentries lounged against their pieces, conversing idly. The captives might perambulate the perimeter. For trench dwellers, the aroma of pitch and moist loam evoked startling vitality. Some progressed via supports, others propped mutually, reclaiming locomotion not as drill but as mere persistence. US fighters occupied pallets alongside, their traumas evident. They cohabited the chamber sans strife, suffering equalized divides. One forenoon, a youthful young sans dexter appendage inquired of Heinrich in stumbling phrases how the maiming transpired. Heinrich rejoined with equal brevity. No partisanship, no rationales, merely datum swapped, akin to cartographers plotting loci on shared charts. The discourse concluded, yet the ensuing stillness altered, less fortified. Weakly, healers scrutinized each cast-off. Remedial exertion transpired via timbered handrails. Warriors, erstwhile parade ground stalwarts, now mastered equipoise like juveniles. Some wept in ire, some in solace. The cadre neither spurred nor quelled lacrimation. They addressed weeping as they did heat or rigidity, an ailment to navigate. The befuddlement burgeoned subtly. These souls had been inculcated to view youngs as boorish or merciless. Instead, they encountered efficacy and pragmatic benevolence exacting not in quid. This lacked proselytizing largesse. It was mere institutional modus, and that mundanity pierced keener than contrived empathy. Yet perplexity breeds its own strife. Belligerence thrives on assurance, assurance of rationale, antagonist, persona. When assurance is eroded, intent falters. Heinrich had deemed combat his essence. Now remediation compelled him to consider tomorrow unanticipated. He pondered if that morrow was his, or if inertia and fate merely propelled him. Karl adhered fiercer to antiquated tenets. Nocturnally he hissed that,